So I think before we get on the record, I think we have the jury coming up, issues that we need to address before we start here this afternoon.
Yeah, Bertrand, I just have the copies of the jury instructions that we discussed.
Thank you.
The two different versions.
And copies too.
Yes, Judge Casaus.
And the thicker set is the one that has them separated, the thinner set is the one.
Yeah.
Combination.
Are your witnesses present for this afternoon?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
It will just be one, Judge.
Oh, it's just going to be one?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. With that, do you anticipate a rebuttal, Mr. Washington?
It depends, I don't know, Your Honor. It still depends on what.
You don't have anybody here. Let's get on the record real quick. We're here in CR 2014-1975, CR 2015-14-16, State versus Stephen Casaus. We have appearances for this.
Nicholas Marshall and Wes Jensen for the city.
Cindy Leos and Tom Clark on behalf of Steve Casaus, who's in court today.
Okay, thank you. When we, before we get the jury up here, we left this morning, so looking at the possibility of the step down. I had a chance to look over lunch a little bit. I think, the council, do you have a chance to look, or is it still too early for you to look at the step down? Did you look at that?
Judge, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, you know, I was sort of looking behind that to sort of see where we were on that, and you know, it seems like it's appropriate if there's a lesser included, and I guess I'm trying to understand if we're going to use that. Are we assuming that count 1 and count 2, these are the resulting in death, are they? I mean, they're both first degree, so they're not really lesser included. So I get the impression that the 625 is necessary when there's a different degree. I don't know that we have that here.
Judge, isn't there a lesser degree with the reckless behavior?
Well, yeah. I'm not talking about. I don't think there is if it's in fact resulting in death. That's how I read it. So, are you reading it that it's a lesser degree?
And Your Honor, this step down may be.
Hang on a second.
I think it could be used either way as alternative theories or as a step down. When it's used as a step down, though, I think it's because the intentional count carries a lifetime enhancement, while the
a lifetime without parole.
No, it's a life with
Life-
call.
life.
It's a non-capital life.
Right.
Yes, and so, but the reckless cause is just a standard first degree of an 18-year sentence.
Oh.
So the, so.
It's
That's the
actually,
difference.
they're both first degree, one's a capital first
There you
degree.
go.
And one is an 18-year first degree.
And
So-
that was where I thought I might be a little bit confused, that
Yeah.
maybe one's the first degree 18 years, and one's the life. So that's the degree. So in that regard, then I think it's appropriate to use 625. I just wanted to make sure that, that's a full thing. All right, are we ready to proceed, sir?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, please be seated, folks. All right, please rise now. Thank you, please be seated. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, nice to see you all back. I think we're ready to get started for the afternoon. Our state, do you have any other witnesses you're going to present for the jury?
No, at this time, the state rests, Your Honor.
All right. And Ms. Lales, Mr. Clark, are you intending to put on some evidence?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Call your first witness.
Dr. Elizabeth Penland.
Mr. Clark, you want to go get her, or Ms. Lales?
Oh, okay.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony about to give in court here this afternoon will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please have a seat. Doctor, would you state your full name for the record, spelling both your first and last name for us?
Yes, my first name is Elizabeth. It's Elizabeth, and my last name is Penland, Penland.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Penland, what is your profession?
I'm a licensed psychologist.
Okay. And could you describe for the jury how long you've been doing this job?
I've been licensed as a psychologist since 1998, and prior to that I was a counselor, licensed professional counselor, and I obtained that licensure in 1980.
All right. Where did you obtain your degrees?
My undergraduate degree was a bachelor's degree in psychology, and that was at the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas. And then I have two master's degrees, one in counseling and one in psychology from Texas A&M University of Commerce. And I have a PhD doctoral degree in psychology, and that was from Texas A&M, also in the Commerce branch.
And so could you describe what your major areas of focus during your studies were?
Right. When I worked with a master's degree and I was a licensed professional counselor, I primarily worked with adults. And when I went back for my doctoral degree, I focused on children, being trained as a child psychologist.
Okay. Do you have any professional certifications?
I'm licensed in the state of New Mexico And
And you've held that license since 1998, is that what you said?
no, I was licensed here in New Mexico in 2001. Prior to that, I was licensed in the state of Colorado, and that was in 1998.
Thank you. Your
And
Honor,
did you want me to go ahead and tell you my internships also? I did some other training. I didn't have that
Absolutely.
too. Right. I also did a pre-doctoral internship in child psychology at Children's Hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia, which was a one-year internship focused on children. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship after I received my PhD, and that was at Bay State Medical System in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And that was 1 year also focused on children and adolescents.
all right. And currently, right now, you are a private psychologist, is that correct?
I'm in private practice in Rio Rancho, and I have an office in Rio Rancho, and then I also have I do some forensic evaluations on children, adolescents, and sometimes adults, and I've gone around the state, pretty much Santa Fe, quite a few cities and courts in New Mexico for that. But my primary occupation right now is a psychologist working with children and adolescents.
All right. How much of your practice is devoted to, do you work with adults? Let me ask you that first.
I do work with
Okay.
adults, yes.
So how much of your practice is devoted to children and how much is devoted to adults?
It kind of changes on a week-to-week basis or month-to-month basis, but probably 50% of my practice is usually about is with children and teenagers and adolescents, and then about 50% in this last 6 months has been with adults. And I also do testing and evaluation, psychological testing, and that's both with children and adults.
And in your years as being a licensed psychologist, how much of your practice has been devoted to working with kids in one form or another?
Since I've been licensed as a psychologist since 1998, probably about 50 to 75% of my practice has been working with children and adolescents.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Sure.
Dr. Penland, I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit J. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, that's my resume or my curriculum vitae.
And if you could look through it quickly and let us know if if it seems accurate to you.
Yes.
Okay. Does it look like there's been any changes or alterations to that document?
No, I think this is up to date.
Your Honor, at this time I'd move to admit Defendant's Exhibit J into evidence.
Motion.
Your Honor, I project under 403.
Well, yeah, come forward.
So, Your Honor, I would move to admit Defendant's Exhibit J into evidence at this time.
Yeah, what was the state's objection to you?
Thank you. Dr. Penland, have you ever testified before?
Yes.
All right, go ahead and describe what you've testified to.
I have in the past, before I got my doctoral degree, I was working, I had an opportunity to talk about a couple of cases I had worked in where children were sexually abused and physically abused, and that was in Texas, in courts in Texas, and I testified in those courts as an expert witness. And in the more recent history, since I'm in New Mexico, I was the mental health director at YDDC, and I was over the diagnostic clinic. And I was asked to do about 5 different youthful offender evaluations. And these were evaluations to see if an adolescent or teenager was going to be tried as sentenced as an adult or a juvenile. And I was asked to testify on those cases. And then since I've been in private practice since 2004, I have testified on competency evaluations for children and, well, for adolescents, competency to stand trial, and also competency to stand as a witness for young children, for a young child. The competency evaluations have been primarily with adolescents and teenagers, and youthful offender evaluations were primarily with teenagers.
Okay. And so approximately, roughly, how many times have you been accepted by a court as an expert? And I'm assuming, let me back up. Has it been an expert in child psychology?
It's been a variety. It was child forensic psychology, child psychology, forensic psychology. So it's been kind of a variety or difference in what I was actually called as an expert witness.
And the overarching sort of qualification has been child psychology with
Yes.
some subspecialties. Is that fair?
That's correct.
All right. And approximately how many times have you been accepted as an expert in the field of basically child psychology?
Probably, my last count was about 25 times here in New Mexico.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit Dr. Penland as an expert in the field of child psychology.
Your Honor, the same objection made at the bench on the second and third prong.
Should be allowed to provide some extra testimonies of child psychologists subject to the court's rule.
Thank you, Judge.
Only states.
Dr. Penland, I want to talk a little bit about memory, okay? Tell me what your knowledge is about false memories in particular.
Okay. With false memories, I have worked with children who have been given false information or have been given information beyond what their experience was or beyond an event. And there were memories that were implanted in the child's memory, so it was a false memory. And this was usually based on information that was given to them after the event.
So broadly speaking, what sorts of things can impact memory?
There are quite a variety of things that can impact memory. One is if it's something traumatic has happened at the time that the event happened, such as car accident, some type of post-traumatic stress disorder can very much affect a child's memory. Some type of their age is very much of a variable. Younger children have weaker, more fragmented memory, and therefore their memories are not as consolidated as an older individual or an adult. And so there's also suggestive interviewing or misleading information that is given to them by other people, by professionals, by their family members, or even hearing something on television or hearing about information can distort their memories.
Okay. And are there any studies within the field of psychology, and particularly child psychology, that have discussed what you described as either implanted memories or false memories?
Yes. One of the early pioneers in memory research is Elizabeth Loftus she was at the University of Washington, and she did many studies on how memory is distorted, or how memory can be affected by various types of events. And she had an article, she's written quite a few articles on, the early articles on false memories. And so there's other people also, quite a few other people since then that have written books and have written, have done articles and have testified about variables that affect memory and about false memories.
Okay. Now, this Dr. Loftus you talked about, is she, the articles that she writes, are they considered, treaties that other people within the field of child psychology rely upon in their work?
Yes, she has written books and been accepted as an authority in the field of child psychology with forensic psychology. And so her work is considered seminal and an authority in the field of psychology.
Are you familiar with any studies that Dr. Loftus did, in particular to, what we're talking about here, with, a study on someone, a child, who has had a false memory?
Yes, there was one study that she did involved a 14-year-old male, and they used him as a case study, and he was given 4 scenarios and by his mother and his brother, and so they gave him these 4 scenarios. One of the scenarios was a false event. So the mother and the brother said, these 3 things actually happened, but there was one event they said that he had gotten lost at a shopping mall. It was actually in Bremerton, Washington. And so they wrote down all of these different scenarios and he was to write on them, or in the next 5 days, discuss them and talk about his memories of these events. And the interesting thing is that he actually came to believe that this false event actually happened, and he actually began to describe it. So he described actually being lost at the mall, described where he was at the mall, and so he actually believed that was a true memory because he was told by his mother and his brother, and he couldn't tell the difference between the true actual events and the false memory. And so that was one of the early studies that happened.
And was he able to recall with any clarity some of the details of being lost?
Yes, he did. He actually talked about that his mother had said, you guys can go get an icy, and he ran ahead, and then he remembered that his mother and his brother were not around, or his mother was not around, and so he remembered the detail of being found by a lady who calmed him down, and he started crying, and he had all these memories which actually never happened. But he was debriefed after the experiment, of course, and told that what happened, that this never happened. And he had a hard time believing that it didn't happen because his memory was so strong for this event, because he actually started to remember different aspects. And as each day went on that he was writing about the event, he was getting more detailed and more descriptive of how he felt when he was lost at the mall, and how he felt later on. And so it seemed that it really was something. He seemed like he really believed it. I mean, he really did believe it.
And none of those events or details or the fact that he ever even got lost at the mall were true, right?
That's right, exactly. That was not true. And he was debriefed later on. The ethical thing to do is to debrief someone. But, yeah.
Okay. And so ultimately, what was Dr. Loftus's conclusion with this study about memory in particular?
Well, Dr. Loftus and her colleagues and other authors have said that actually memory can be altered. There can be distortions in memory with new information. So when new information is introduced, it actually contaminates the memory is altered. And it's actually been thousands of studies that have shown that since that time, in the last 2 decades, that memory can be altered, that events that happened, especially in childhood, but it's also been studies that have shown this can happen to adults, that memory can be distorted or contaminated. It can be altered with new information or with suggestive interviewing, with other events that have happened.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Dr. Penland.
Good afternoon.
And we spoke on the phone back on August 19th of this year.
Yes,
right?
sir.
And we did that interview over the phone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. One of the things I asked you then was the questions about delayed disclosure. And you said that delayed disclosure is a memory that a person hasn't talked about before and that they later decide to share in therapy. Is that right?
Objection beyond the scope.
Okay. So
I think what I intended to say, and I think what I said is that can be one description of delayed memory. Not everyone decides to talk about it in therapy. Some people just remember. Some people talk about it and go to therapy. Some people don't.
And you said that a lot of times delayed disclosures are memories that are based around a traumatic event?
Yes.
And that you provided several reasons, kind of like now that you said they might not talk about it, like fear, apprehension, fear of retribution, shame, or just not wanting to talk about something, that why someone might delay in disclosing an event?
Well, they may not be conscious of it. They may not remember it. It may not have come into their conscious mind.
And age is also a factor in delayed disclosure, correct?
Yes, yes.
Younger children tend to disclose later or take longer to disclose?
Younger children tend to have a more fragmented, weaker memory, and therefore I don't have a study that actually says that they actually disclose later, but they do have, their memories are usually more fragile and not as consolidated as someone who is older. Preschoolers in particular have more difficulty with memory.
All right. Would you agree then with a study done in Acta Pediatrica from 2002 that talks about that young age, a time of abuse, and close relationship to perpetrator are important in determining delayed disclosure?
Yes.
Okay. And that abuse within the family or by a person that they have a trusting relationship with, a child would be more likely to delay in disclosing than abuse from a stranger or someone they didn't trust.
That's been my experience, yes.
And then would you agree with a 2009 study in the Child Abuse and Neglect Journal titled Child Abuse, Betrayal, and Disclosure, that disclosures of child abuse and victims who had suffered emotional or physical abuse by someone close to them were significantly more likely to wait more than a year or never disclose than those abused by an individual they were not close to?
I would agree with that.
When we interviewed you, also talked a little bit about if you were asked to tell the difference between an implanted memory and a delayed disclosure, you stated that wouldn't be your job as a role as a therapist.
I don't remember stating it that way, but I think it was, I think what I was trying to say is that when a memory is processed, when it first comes up, it's not always apparent if it's a delayed memory or an implanted memory. It's quite often they're sometimes the same. It's variable.
Okay. And as part of the studies in psychology, it's important for these studies to be peer-reviewed, is that
Yes.
right? And to be validated.
Yes.
And that's all before they kind of receive general acceptance within the community, the psychological community.
That's correct.
During your interview, I asked you if there were any articles that you were going to rely on for your opinion. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at the time, you couldn't think of any articles off the top of your head. But later, you provided an article to defense that was forwarded to me on August 31st of this year. Is that right?
Right. Right.
All right. That article that you forwarded was an unpublished manuscript. Is that correct?
I believe it was based on a study that was accepted and peer-reviewed and had been published. But one of the reasons, it was some of the articles that when I said I didn't really have any particular articles, a lot of the books that I have and that I've read on child memory and memory in children who've been abused have been parts of books, and so they weren't articles, they were actually in parts of books.
All right, but the article that you said you were going to rely on and that was forwarded to me, the beginning of that article says this manuscript is close to the final version.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
We haven't got an answer yet.
So it was an unpublished manuscript.
I don't know, I thought it was published.
It's also an incomplete manuscript, is that right? That the figure, it doesn't contain the figures and diagrams, and in the body, it says that figures not included in this email version, but the message is easy to understand without them. So that would imply that this is an incomplete version of the manuscript as well.
The books where I've read where that has been in the studies have had statistics and have been studied with data that showed the actual statistical analysis.
But the article or the manuscript that you said you were relying on, and it was forwarded to me, that was an incomplete and unpublished version, correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
I'm not sure if we got the answer or not. So let me see if I can get an answer.
Yes, sir.
Let me do it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yes, the article that I did provide was one of many that I have, and it was one by Elizabeth Loftus. I have many others by Elizabeth Loftus in books, and so I don't know which one got forwarded to you. I think I gave several to the defense attorney. I think I forwarded several to her. I can't really remember exactly which one was unpublished, but I thought it had been published, so.
Would you like me to show it to you?
Sure.
Sure.
Well, it says this manuscript was close to the final version that was published with this citation, and so the psychiatric annals had just not come out, but it was accepted for publication. And so it was accepted as for publication, and the actual psychiatric annals where it was being published just had not come out yet, from what I understand.
But it's come out since then, and you chose to give me the unpublished version of that, correct?
Objection, relevance, and asked and answered.
Come forward.
Yeah, approach him. Which need you for that,
Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you. So what the article said was that it was close to a final version that was published in 1995 in the Psychiatric Annals, but this wasn't the final version.
I guess it was not. It's been published also in numerous books, and it's been referenced in quite a few other articles. I think what I remembered on our phone conversation was that I was going to, you asked for some names, and I gave you several names, and that was what I remembered, and she was very well known in the field.
All right. But the actual article that was sent was still an incomplete and unpublished article.
It looks like it was.
And in that article, it references that study that you were talking about, the Lost in the Shopping Mall study, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that was done by Loftus while she was working at the University of Washington, correct?
She's a professor at the University of Washington, yes.
She's actually been criticized about that because she didn't have permission to test on human subjects at the time that this test was being done, is that correct?
I'm not aware of that.
I'm going to be showing you an article that's entitled Lost in the Shopping Mall, A Breach of Professional Ethics. It was printed in the Ethics and Behavior Journal in 1999. And I'd like to draw your attention to page 42 of the article.
42?
Yes, please.
I need my glasses. Could I have my glasses?
Sure.
If you want me to read something, yeah.
I'm sorry. May I approach that over? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, sir.
All right, and on page, numbered page 42 on the top left, you'll see about halfway down the page, it starts with Loftus, 1992, and the article says that Loftus proceeded to describe the experience of Chris, the 14-year-old pilot subject, in whom a false lost memory was implanted in 1991 without HSC approval. And HSC in this case is the Human Subjects Committee.
Correct.
So that would seem to imply that she was conducting research without permission using human subjects. Is that correct?
That's what this article says, yes.
And previously on your direct exam, you said it's important to practice ethical behavior in the field of psychology, and debriefing and everything is important. Is that correct?
Correct.
It goes on page 45, in the first full paragraph.
As an expert, you should rely on hearsay information of studies that she didn't write.
Maybe approach on it?
Please.
It goes on to criticize the study that it failed to do the appropriate protocols by the University of Washington Human Subjects Committee. Is that correct?
I haven't had a chance to read this entire article, but This often happens in the field of psychology, that especially in a journal like this where it's on ethics and behavior, there's experiments and studies are criticized, and there's back and forth discussion in the literature and in manuals and professional manuals and journals about the appropriateness of experiments, and there's always a lot of criticism that happens. But I can tell you that she had many, many, many other studies after this one where there was human subjects approval.
And I know you've said that, but the study that you've decided to focus on in your testimony and direct examination was the Lost in the Mall study. And so this is a critique saying that because it's important for, in the university setting, in the psychology setting, to get prior permission to test on human subjects. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in this case, this article is pointing out that she broke protocol and failed to use the proper forms and to use the proper formats for testing with human subjects. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't had a chance to read the entire article.
That's fine. It's the first full paragraph on page 45, if you'd like to.
On page 45, you said?
Yes, ma'am.
The first full one? Okay. It says there's no evidence to indicate that...
Just read it, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
That's
It is the opinion of this author of this article that she was not, that she did not go by protocol, but I believe that there would be many other articles that probably followed this one that criticized this article and had conflict with the opinion of this author, because that happens all the time in research literature.
But this was a published article in Ethics in the Journal of Ethics and Behavior.
That's correct.
And that's a peer-reviewed journal.
From what I'm not familiar with this particular journal, but that's the opinion of this author.
Okay. I'm sorry, that was, I may have misstated the title of the journal. That was Ethics and Behavior, is that correct? I thought I might have said something else.
Ethics and Behavior, yes.
Just want to make sure. And I know you stated that this article is specifically critiquing that study, but when trying to reproduce it, several studies have failed. When they talk about, in this case, on page 44, they cite to a study where they tried to implant a false memory that a person received a painful enema as a child. 0 of the participants were able to implant that false memory.
Right, that's been quoted in the literature, that is one particular type of experience that does not work as a false memory. But there's many others that have been provided in the literature in the last 25 years that differ from this.
One of the other critiques of the Lost in the Shopping Mall study is that it wasn't a double-blind study. Is that correct?
You know, I'm not familiar with the critiques of this particular, I'm not really familiar with that article that you're talking about.
But in a double-blind study, it's a study where the experimenter and the subject are unaware of who the other person is that right?
Correct.
And in this case, you've already said that the person was being tested on was by the mother and the brother, is that right?
That was a pilot study, and it was later followed with a larger study of 25 subjects, and that there was another whole published area that was based on this pilot study.
And they still used family members in each part of that pilot study, is that correct?
They used family members in the pilot study, and in the major study that followed after that. There have been variations by many other variations on this experiment or on this study in the last 25 years, and it's been done in various ways. The research design has happened or has been designed in various ways.
But again, back to the study that you were citing, the Lost in the Shopping Mall study, was a study that was not done in a double-blind fashion.
That's correct.
Have a moment, Chairman. And Dr. Penland, you talked about your experience that you've worked with adolescents and children and adults as well.
Yes.
And is it your experience that when a child feels safe is a lot of the times when you're able to get some of those delayed disclosures that happen in your practice?
Sometimes that happens, and other times there can be other triggers that bring up a memory. So it's not always that they feel safe. Sometimes that's certainly the case at times, yes.
Okay. And Dr. Penland, you were hired by the defense attorney?
Yes, sir.
And how much are you being paid today?
My fee for working for the public Office of the Public Defender in Santa Fe is $140 an hour, and it's a limit of 20 hours.
Okay. Any further questions?
Dr. Penland, would your testimony,
I guess I'm assuming.
oh, I'm sorry, Judge.
It's roughly your.
Oh, sorry, I said no further questions. I'm sorry. I must have not said it into the microphone. I apologize.
Sorry, Judge. Dr. Penland, if you were hired by this state in this case, would your opinion be different than what it is today?
No.
Would your testimony be the same today if you were paid by the state versus by defense?
It would be the same.
Now, you talked about this Lost in the Mall study has been sort of duplicated, replicated, tried different ways over the past 25 years. Is that right?
There's been many studies on memory, and that's one of them. Right. There's many others.
And that it's not necessarily unusual for a psychologist doing experiments like this to be criticized for ethical things that they've done.
There's all kinds of criticisms in the literature for research design, from conclusions that have been drawn. There's always a constant interplay in the journals as far as criticism of different professors' work, different researchers' work.
Okay. And so based on the criticism here that Dr. Loftus didn't basically go through the right steps to get permission to do this study, does that change the outcome of the study?
No, not at all. No.
So what was the concern then with that, if you know?
I had never heard that before. It's a surprise to me. The requirements for a pilot study are not as stringent as they are for an actual experiment. I have a really hard time believing that Dr. Loftus would not have gotten the approval of Human Subjects Committee.
Why do you say that?
She's the best known individual or professor or researcher on human memory, and her reputation would be damaged. She would be fired from the university. There would be terrible consequences if she had not gone through the right protocol.
Dr. Penland, is there a difference, at least in your work with kids, is there a difference between the truth, what actually happened?
Objection, Your Honor. Outside the scope of cross.
Your Honor, may we approach? So Dr. Penland, as I was asking, in your work with children, would you say that there's a difference between the truth, what actually happened, and a child's truth?
Objection, Your Honor. Same objection.
Quite often we don't know what exactly happened, the truth, but the child's emotional experience, the child's memory, is their reaction to that memory is part of what we try to find healing for that child through therapy. And the most important thing is that the child's therapy, the child's emotional recovery is foremost. And we're not psychologists, and therapists are not police investigators. We're not trained to be in the CIA or to do the FBI. We are working with human emotions, trying to help children heal, trying to help individuals heal from trauma, and that's our goal.
So would you agree then that there is a difference between the two?
Yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want me to give these to the...
Any reason why Dr. She have a subpoena?
She is Judge Ed.
Any reason to keep her subpoena?
Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Ms. Lales, Mr. Clark, are you next week?
Your Honor, defense rests.
Level on that? Mr. Marshall?
There.
All right, folks. Well, at this point, we're going to dismiss you for a little bit here this afternoon. And, well, counsel, come forward before I. It's not going to take a full 2 weeks to get that to you. The bad thing is you just were here for an hour. So, same admonition to you. Go home, relax, or do whatever you need to do here this afternoon. Just stay away from any coverage of it, any news coverage or discussion about it with anybody, including each other. Let us get this case to you starting tomorrow morning, and then begin your deliberations, probably late morning or early afternoon. So we'll get this case to you then, but it's going to be really important that you keep yourself sequestered as best you can until we get to that point. So sorry to just bring you in here for just a little bit, but it's a necessary thing to do. So leave your writing pads in here with Ms. Pat, and they'll be available for you tomorrow morning. I'd like you to come back. Let's see what's going on. Do that. I have a couple things in the morning at 8:15. So let's have you come back at 8:30. Okay. And then downstairs in the assembly area, and then we can finish these things, bring you up and get you going. Okay? All right. Thank you for your patience. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:30. Please rise. All right, thank you. Please be seated. What I'd like to do is just take a little bit of time, you take a look at these as well. Give you a chance to finish them up. I'm assuming, Mr. Clark, you're going to be arguing one way or the other.
Yes.
And then we'll come back and talk about them a little bit, and then see if we can get them finalized this afternoon, so we can have those ready to go first thing in the morning. I do have a couple of things going on. We got one small hearing, a plea right at 8:15, and we can get those done fairly quickly and try to be close to ready to go at 8:30. Okay. All right. So let's just take a little bit of recess and go over those, and then I'll be back maybe 15 minutes. Will that work?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have a GMS for you.
I'm sorry?
I have a judgment and sentence for you to sign if you would.
In another case, Mr.
Yes.
So you're trying to get two birds with one stone here? No?
Maybe.
All right. I do, before we go off, one of the things that I do provide is our Murdoch instruction. I need to talk about that. I don't know if it's going to be necessary in this particular case. One of the things that we want to do is provide the transcript of NB's testimony to the jury to refer to. I don't know that that's going to spur on any request from them for further transcripts. One of the things I normally do is because we have very limited resources in being able to provide transcripts of all the testimony. I think it just delays things incredibly, and I make juries rely upon the memory of the testimony, the notes that they take, which is why we allow them to take notes, so that we don't spend the time having to figure out if we can get the transcripts done, all of the testimony. So I don't completely forbid it, but indicate to them we're not preparing those things. We don't prepare them in advance for them. They're going to get the testimony of Medea to refer to if they need to or want to in the deliberation. But the others are really not generally prepared for it. So it's a Murdoch instruction. I'll include that for you and let you take a look at it. If you have some objections to it, we can certainly do that. It's not a UJI. It's one I think I've used in most of my cases, but we'll talk about it before it's actually given to the jury. Okay?